Michael Mulhern, thank you for joining me on What's Possible.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, before we hopped on, I just was telling Michael, I have now read a lot of books on leadership, on, how to perform at your optimal level, all of that because of obviously the profession that I'm in, the kind of work I do, as well as this podcast. So, get to read a lot of fantastic books around leadership. And I just said to Michael, yours is probably one of the favorites I have ever read. And our listeners will know I don't always say that. I think I've read so many awesome books, so I don't want to compare. However, the reason I said that, Michael, and then I'm going to introduce you, or I'm going to let you introduce yourself fully. The reason that I said that is Michael Mulhern wrote the book, The CEO Playbook. And what he has done throughout this playbook, and this is why I wanted him on the podcast, is share stories, being in the trenches, and made it really practical, really interesting, and applicable to our leaders out there. So I am so thrilled to get to share your thoughts, your wisdom, and your experience with our audience. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, as we kick it off, you've written the book, The CEO Playbook. We're going to talk about how to perform optimally and take care of yourself, obviously, in the process. But before we do, anybody maybe could write a book about anything, but you're not anybody and you didn't just write a book on a random topic. So, can you let our audience know what even led you to writing the book, The CEO Playbook?
Well, first off, let me just say that I've had a 40-year career in business, and I guess you would say I'm a student of business. Today, I currently serve as executive chairman of a company called Epsilon Global. And basically, that's a management partnership I have with a Chicago based private equity firm called GTCR. And we're actually looking to acquire assets in the healthcare space. We call it Epsilon because it represents the fifth partnership that I've had with GTCR. Epsilon is
Mm.
obviously the fifth letter of the Greek alphabet. Prior to Epsilon, I actually ran four different private equity backed companies over the past 25 years. The interesting thing is that all four were in different industries. The first one was in distribution, the second in consumer products, the next in healthcare business services, and the most recent in pharmaceuticals. But despite kind of the differences and the nuances of the industry, I literally executed the same game plan uh, uh, within each of them. And then prior to becoming a CEO, uh, back when I was 41, I actually worked for Baxter Healthcare and Alliant Food Service. And then the final thing I would say is I currently sit on a couple of boards of directors today. But your question is why write the book and what was kind of the motivation? And I think as I thought about my 40-year career, there was so much I learned. I've worked for great leaders, I've worked with great leaders, I've had the personal opportunity to lead four different companies. And I just felt there were certain experiences I wanted to get down on paper and document them. I also, I think, have clarity around the topic of leadership from my 40 years of experience. And probably more than anything, I wanted to create a section of the book around advice for aspiring leaders. Eileen, I'm sure you get the same question. I get a lot of folks in college or young professionals, and they ask me, Michael, what are the three things that correlate to your success? And my answer is it's never just about three things. Success is more complicated than that. But if you'll spend 3 hours reading my book, I think you'll get a much better sense of what I view as being the 10 to 12 things that I call out in the book that I think can make someone's career more fulfilling and successful. And quite honestly, there's a second part of this, which is I grew up the youngest of eight children, and I never knew my grandparents. They had passed before I was old enough to know them. And I also wrote the book for my future grandchildren because
Mm.
I wanted them to have some measure in terms of who I was if I never had the good fortune of knowing them. But I do have some good news. Uh, My first grandchild was born this past week, my granddaughter, McKenna Mulhern. So I'm
Oh,
just delighted.
oh, wow. I have chills, Michael. That's awesome. Congratulations to
Thank you.
you. That's amazing. And local or going to be local. I think I remember when we were
Yeah, it
talking.
lives literally 2 miles away in Wilmette, Illinois, and I live in Winnetka, so it's, my wife and I are just absolutely thrilled. We're thrilled for them, obviously thrilled for the baby.
Well, and I will say, and our listeners have heard me talk a lot about my dad over the many episodes that we've done at this point. And one thing that he did do was he wrote a bunch of books and he wrote one specifically for the grandchildren. And I always say that having, whether it's a book, having videos, having something that we have as kind of a legacy for forever that we can always go back to, refer back to. And so you have provided a huge gift for your kids, for your grandkids, their kids, and so forth. So uh, I think you will have many generations benefiting from your words of wisdom.
Thank you.
I wanna start in a weird place. Normally, I was, telling Michael before we hopped on, I said, I always ask something kinda unique or different about you to share with the audience. But I love your 7th grade story on the bus. So can you this is a story that's in the book, and I read it, and I read it when I was getting my hair cut, and I said to the person cutting my hair, "I've gotta tell you this story, it's so cute." So will you share that, and then we will kick it off and talk about aspiring leaders.
Sure. So at the beginning of the book, I thought I would literally just start at the beginning, which was my first entrepreneurial inspiration. And it actually came to me at the age of 12. I was in the 7th grade and I was waiting for the morning school bus to take me to St. Aloysius Academy in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And the bus pulled up and I jumped on, and the bus driver's name was Jack. And I asked Jack if every morning for the rest of the school year he could pick me up at the next bus stop, which was about a quarter mile up the road. He said yes. I said thank you and walked towards the back of the bus. The next morning, I woke up 20 minutes early because I needed more time to get to my new bus stop that was further away. Before I got there, I actually bought a dozen steaming hot off the rack glazed donuts. And as I walked out of the bakery, the bus pulled up just as planned. When I jumped on the bus, I gave Jack a donut and I said, "Would you like a glazed donut?" And he naturally said, "Of course, yes." But Jack's donut was compliments of the house. I didn't charge. As I turned and walked down the aisle of the bus, the aroma of these glazed donuts was overwhelming. And one by one, I asked the kids if they'd like to buy a donut. By the time I got to the back of the bus, I had sold 10 donuts, and I kept the last donut for myself in recognition of a job well done. My business model was simple. It was to buy inventory in bulk and sell in low unit of measure. A dozen donuts cost me $1.20 or 10 cents a piece. I sold the donuts for 25 cents a piece. Accounting for the donut I gave Jack and the one I kept for myself, I still made a profit margin of 52%. My return on invested capital was amazing. Literally within minutes of acquiring my inventory, I got an immediate and attractive return on my invested capital. Now, this went on for some time. This was my routine: wake up early, buy a dozen donuts, give one away, sell 10, keep the last one for myself. Business actually was incredibly good. Then one morning I got to school after about 2 months of this, and I was called down to the principal's office, Sister Mary Ellen. Sister Mary Ellen was known to be tough but fair, and she also didn't mince her words. She quickly informed me she was shutting down my business enterprise due to numerous complaints from parents. And I quickly sensed she really wasn't in the mood to try and have an open exchange on the topic. But what was racing through my mind was, was it because of the ill effects of the sugar? Or was it the relatively high price point I was charging their boys for a single donut? Either way, my business was gone. I was a 12-year-old boy playing in an adult world. I was devastated. But bus driver Jack, he was even more devastated. He really missed his morning donut. The reality is, I couldn't have thought about, let alone anticipated, all of the experiences, the events, the challenges, the opportunities that would ultimately define my business career, and also shape my leadership philosophy that I've developed over time. So it was there that I began the book, and then when I close out the book, I come back to the same story.
I love it. And it highlights one of your big points is it's not so much style, but it's superior execution. And you
Yeah.
had superior execution on that. So I commend you for that, even though it was shut down. So I can understand why you say there aren't just three things. Your book is filled with tips and ideas and I love how humble you are too as you're sharing things throughout the book. And it shows you have that one chapter which I really loved on sincerity
Mhm.
and a sincerity of thought, sincerity of action, and sincerity of voice. And I do think as we think about leaders, I'd love to start with that area because it keeps people being authentic through and through. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit about that if you don't mind starting there.
Yeah, I think, if I were standing in front of 100 executives and I asked them, what is the single most important characteristic of a highly effective leader? I would get great answers. Somebody would say, intellectual capacity. Another person may say strategic thinking. Another may say results orientation. Another may say trustworthiness. And they're all kind of the right answer, right? Because they're all wonderful traits to have. And I'm sure, most highly effective leaders possess to a degree all of those. But if you had to pin me down and say, Michael, based on your 40 years, what is the single most important characteristic? To me, it's sincerity. And you
Mhm,
did a nice job. I think about sincerity across three dimensions: sincerity of thought, voice, and action. And sincerity of thought is having the ability to be intellectually honest with yourself and with others. And when you're in business and you're in the stress of business, it is so important that you face business realities and you communicate the problem and the potential solution with great integrity and honesty. Uh, Sincerity of voice. This is speaking and communicating in a way that is simple, honest, straightforward, and candid. Sincerity of action. Sincerity of action is simply saying that you recognize that what you do speaks so loud, people can't hear a single word you say, and that you follow through on what you committed to. And that sincerity of action, in my opinion, separates many leaders from highly
mhm.
effective ones.
The one that sincerity of action, I also took note as reading through the book is also being able to change your mind. And that healthcare story really stuck with me. The one
Mhm.
where you changed your mind on that. I forgot what it was called, but the spousal carve out. And I think that's a great story. I feel like I'm teeing you up for all these stories, but I love these stories. I'm like, oh, I want our listeners to hear. Share on that because I think oftentimes a leader feels like if they go back on a decision, and not that you always want to go back on a decision, hopefully it's few and far between, but sometimes to stay sincere, it necessitates thinking about others and rethinking something that you might have acted upon. And I love that story if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah. So, you know, it was about this time every year you begin to think about healthcare benefits for employees for the following year. And you have to go through the negotiation of those benefits. And we always used a third party broker in all the companies I ran. And the broker suggested as a way to manage costs lower was to implement what's called a spousal carve out plan, which simply means that if the spouse of one of our employees has healthcare benefits, then our employee wouldn't be eligible. They would have to use the spouse's healthcare benefits. The broker said this is going to affect a very small portion of your employee population, and it has been growing in popularity among many companies that that I represent. And so we implemented it. We communicated, we rolled out the healthcare benefits, and the employees loved the benefits. And we always had a goal to make sure they were in the upper quartile of all companies. That was our stated purpose because we value employees. But we got a lot of negative feedback on this spousal carve out thing. And so I asked my HR vice president to see if he could gather 3 or 4 employees that were affected by it, get some facts and figures, and help us understand kind of the gravity of the impact to our employees. Well, we learned a couple of things. Number one, it impacted a much larger percent of the employee population than we anticipated. And number two, in every instance, our employees would have to pay more for healthcare benefits. So, with this new information, and I'm a big believer that when you get access to new information, you should always be comfortable taking that information. And if it means you're reversing a previous decision, then reverse it. And in this case, that's exactly what I did. We removed the spousal carve out. I always viewed employees as the greatest asset of every company I ran. And if that's true, then I can't put a cost burden upon them. That's unfair. So, yeah, I think I have a quote in the book where I mentioned first seek the truth and then move forward without fear. We learned the truth. I would have liked to have learned the truth before we made the original decision, but eventually we found out the truth. Too many people were
Yeah.
impacted, and it was always negative for that employee. So we made and we reversed the decision.
Yeah. I love that. It again, it goes back to that sincerity and truly caring. And you talk a lot about that through the book about caring about people at every single level
Yeah,
and seeing it doesn't matter that I forget the exact quote, but you talked about the distance between the CEO and the person who is, cleaning the facility should not be so large. You should be in contact and connected. And it just speaks volumes for the type of leader you are, and I love having that in the book so other leaders can really embody that same kindness and sincerity and authenticity.
yeah. I learned. I don't know when it was, but a long time ago, that there's a tendency for senior executives to want to fly the plane at about 35,000 feet. And, they worked their whole career and they moved up the corporate ladder and now they're either on the executive team or they're running the company. And now they really don't, they have other people that manage the folks down on the manufacturing floor or manage people in the distribution center or manage people that are cleaning the building. And my philosophy always was I wanted them to know who I was. I wanted to know who they were. I wanted to know what were the obstacles getting in the way of their success. And
Mm.
once you kind of create this environment, and I call it a flat organization. Yeah, I worked in corporate America and I learned a lot, but the one thing I couldn't stand was the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I always said if I was gonna get a chance to be a CEO someday, I would think about it as a totally flat organization, right? No titles. And I would tell employees, and in every company I led, I told them this: "I don't care what your title is, and you shouldn't care what mine is. We're all on the same team. I'm gonna lay out where we're gonna take the company, what your role is, how we're gonna get there, why it's a better place than where we're at today. But we're all one team. I need your best thinking, your best ideas. And that has absolutely zero to do with what your title is. And so if I can get
Yeah.
everyone to pull the rope in the same direction, in corporate America, I worked for a Fortune 100 company. It was like half the employees pulled the rope in one direction, then the other half was pulling in the opposite direction. And the
Yeah.
challenge for a leader, in particular a CEO, is to get half of the group to drop the rope, walk around and grab the rope on the other side. Because when you can do that, that's when you get breakthroughs in performance.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, it's so good. And it brings me back, and I know I'm kind of jumping all over the book, but it all is so intertwined. It reminds me of when you talked about the parachute and you asked a question in that chapter about, do you know how many people are working for your success? And I think of that question as you're talking about, okay, let's stop pulling against each other. If we all work towards each other's success and are all committed towards working together towards that common goal, we're going to get there a lot faster.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think when people think about their success in terms of what they've achieved, I think they're missing a really large part of this thing. A large part of success is understanding you never did it on your own. There were
Yeah.
always people, either obvious people or people behind the scenes that were supporting you uh, at every instance. And you have to recognize those people and you have to recognize that, their role in your success. And yeah, I'm a big believer, obviously, in, you know, building teams, inspiring performance. I have a view that every morning my employees woke up, they could look in the mirror and say, do I want to go to work today? Or do I want to choose to work somewhere else?
Hmm.
And I always wanted them to say, I want to go to work with Michael and for his company because I'm valued, I'm respected, I'm treated with dignity, I'm inspired, to achieve kind of new levels of performance. And I think, look, I mean, I knew at any given day, any employee could leave. But
Yeah.
when you think about it in that context, then you try and build a winning culture all around the employees to create an environment that they wouldn't want to leave. And kind of this
Yeah.
concept of a performance slash winning culture combined with values. It can't be performance at all cost, right? It's you
Yeah.
have to achieve, but you have to do it the right way with the right set of values. And when people don't display those values, and people who've worked for me know this, I ask them to leave the team
Yeah.
because values matter.
Yeah. I liked your quadrant a lot on that. Can you describe the quadrant, kind of walk people through that? Because that, I think it'll be interesting for our listeners to think, where do I fall on this quadrant?
Yeah. And I've used it in every company that I've run. It's basically a four-box grid. And so if you can imagine, you just take on the vertical axis would represent performance, and the horizontal axis would represent values. And then you create lines in the middle, so you end up with four boxes. So you could have high performance, high values. That's the best of the employee group, right?
Yep.
Those employees are elite. You have low performance, high values. That I would describe, and I've described to employees over the years, you didn't meet your financial commitments this previous year. And you're going to get another shot, and I need you to make your plan this year. Nothing wrong with those people. For whatever reason, they missed their numbers. They're going to come back and do it again. Low values, low performance. I mean, I would always hope those employees don't exist inside our company. But I always said to the extent that they did, I would invite them to leave. And then you have the hardest, most difficult box for corporations to deal with: high performance, low values. There's a tendency to look the
Hmm.
other way. This
Yeah.
person is so good, they deliver so much, we're just going to kind of tolerate this nonsense. And I remember standing in front of 100 managers at my very first company I was CEO at, and I had them evaluate across each of those four dimensions. And they had to put literally a color coded card in a box. And then I reported back where everyone perceived that they were. Out of 100 people, 97 of them said that they were high performance, high values. Two people said that they were low performance, high values, one of which I told the group was me. I had just joined the company. I could hardly consider myself a high performer. I'd made no contribution. And then one person rated themselves high performance, low values. And I asked the group, I said, how many of you achieved your business plan last year? And a few hands went up out of 100, right? And I said, we just identified one of our core problems. We all think
Yeah.
we're high performers. The company we're responsible for is failing miserably. right? So then
Yeah.
we rolled it out, but there was one person that rated himself high performance, low values. I said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know whether you're trying to be humorous, with the new boss." I said, "I'll figure out who you are. I'm gonna ask you to leave because this company is gonna move forward, high performance, guided by values." That's just what I believe in a culture.
Yeah. Okay, did you find the person?
Yes.
You did.
Oh, over time,
Okay.
it becomes obvious,
Obvious. Yeah,
right? Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
All right, so I like my guests to get to decide kind of where we go, but I got so into your book that, of course, I directed into different areas that I just wanted to dive deeper. What am I missing that you feel like, "Oh, I really wanna talk about this for aspiring leaders?"
It's interesting. I'm asked a lot about the 4 companies that I've led. They are all 4 different, but I would argue they have far more in common than they have in contrast.
Mm,
And all companies basically have 3 value drivers: customers, products and services, and employees. And the real key is to build a game plan around each of those value drivers to enhance and improve them in a way that changes and enhances the overall performance of the company. Now, one of the first things I'll do inside a company when I come in is I'll evaluate structurally where the company's at and try and figure out how do we create organizational alignment. If you want to be a high performance company, 6 things have to be in alignment. The first is a clear vision of where the company's going. The second is a clear set of strategies that, if executed appropriately, will allow you to achieve your vision. The third is structure. Once you understand where you're going, the strategies that will get you there, you then organize the team and apply the resources that will allow you to execute your strategies.
mm,
The fourth is decision support. Does information exist inside the company for management to make good decisions? The second part of decision support is at what level are decisions made and how are they made? The fifth box is reward systems. How are people compensated? How are they motivated to execute the business strategies? Is compensation linked to the direction of the company? And then the final box is HR systems. Do you have a recruiting process? Do you have a performance management process that ensures you have the best talent on the playing field? And I use a lot of sports analogies in the
yeah,
book, but I do think it kind of works because I see business and sports being very similar. If those 6 things are in alignment, you can create high performance. If any one of those 6 is missing, then you have an organization that has a variety of reactions, from being frustrated, confused, a company that's very slow to change, a company that makes poor or no decisions, to anxiety. And so
yeah.
I always rebuild the company conceptually around those 6 boxes. And then roll it out to the top 100 managers inside the company. So this concept of organizational alignment is absolutely critical. When I
Yeah.
ask a group of employees, how many of you have ever worked inside a company where it was unclear where the company was going? Bunch of hands go up. How many of you ever worked for a team or a department or a division or a company where they simply just wouldn't make a decision? Bunch of hands go up. How many people really felt that their compensation aligned with where the company was trying to go? And a bunch of hands go up. And so it's trying to fix this misalignment. And when you
Yeah,
create it, that begins the process for breakthroughs in performance. So
yeah.
that would be one thing I would articulate.
Yeah, I like that, and that's one thing that throughout the book, again, is that transparency and clear communication too that I hear through that. Employees wanna know. As do customers. They want some, transparency to the level that you can give it, as well as, for people communicating. I'm gonna pick up on just one of those and ask a question. On the compensation, the reward, oftentimes, let's say in an organization, whether they'll the sales area, I'm going to just say the sales area
Sure.
of an organization, oftentimes that compensation, that how they go about it is individually linked, which then can undermine that team because you're competing against each other. How might an organization, this has come up for some of our clients, how might an organization reward individual achievements and inspire a team, team goals as well?
Yeah, I get this question a lot
I'm
because it
sure.
really is, is a material topic that
Mhm.
executives are always kind of kicking back and forth, and even inside private equity firms. Here's my belief. When you think about how to motivate and inspire and compensate people, you have to start with circle of influence versus circle of concern. And this is a Stephen Covey concept, right? Circle of influence is all of the stuff that you as an individual can control the outcome, right? Circle of concern is all the stuff that keeps you up at night, but you have no control over, but probably sits in somebody else's circle of influence, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about a sales representative, I think about what is it they can control. Well, they can definitely control customer relationships, revenue, gross margins, product mix. And so I always thought about compensation. Incent them where they can influence the outcome. Don't incent them where it's in their circle of concern.
If an org is looking to not only boost individual performance, but also team performance, and you have a compensation structure or an incentive program that almost goes against that team performance because you're so busy incentivizing individual performance. Any thoughts on how you might do both? So raise that individual performance while also helping to increase team performance.
Yeah, I've seen over the years, sometimes you'll have a percentage of compensation linked to the overall team or the overall company. And typically it might be 20% of the total incentive pool, if you will. And I think
Okay.
something like that is fine. Uh, I'm not a huge fan of it just because, again, people tend to do what they're incented to do. I remember I stepped into a company and revenues were up 30% and earnings had declined 50%,
Wow.
right? That's just a huge. So I went back and took a look at compensation programs, and the entire commercial team was based on revenue.
Mm,
There was no incentive at all, no requirement for gross margin.
mm.
So all they had to do was sell and they were rewarded. And here's my takeaway. People will do exactly what you incent them to do. They
Yeah,
will. And
yeah,
yeah, circle of
yeah.
influence I think is most important.
Yeah. And for those who do buy the book, you will see that in the book too. Michael talks about circle of influence and circle of control, or yeah, circle. Did I say that right?
Concern.
Circle concern. Thank you. I knew that did come out right. Okay. So before I let you go, I would be remiss because our podcast always talks about both leadership and well being. And I would imagine at times your stress level may go up just in the roles that you've been in over the course of 40 years. How, and as you think about aspiring leaders, that's critical because we do know the science and evidence behind if our well being takes a hit, it's really hard to perform at your optimal level. Productivity goes down, profitability goes down, all of that takes a hit. So something tells me that you've somehow managed your well-being during the course of very stressful times. Please share what you do.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I guess most people would say, golf and do those kinds of things. But to me, I learned early on in management that managers, unlike sales reps, you can't run on emotion because there's too many highs and too many lows. And when emotions kind of fuel your energy, that's when you can create burnout. You're It's difficult to work for people that run on emotion because they're unpredictable in
Yeah.
terms of their behavior. So I always led companies with this belief. When things are going really well, I never allow myself to get comfortable because I always, in the back of my mind, I'm like, things are never as good as they seem, and they're definitely never as bad as they seem.
Mm,
So when you get
yeah,
into a really difficult situation and people might have a tendency not to want to tell you bad news, it's so important that you have this even, predictable demeanor. And I think
mm,
by not allowing myself to kind of get in these emotional highs and lows, that I'm able to manage the stress level well. Uh, Now, do I do things outside of work? Yeah, I love to boat. In fact, that's probably one of my shortcomings. Uh, I own too many boats, but it's just everybody needs to find a place where their blood pressure can come down. And I was talking to a founder of a private equity firm yesterday morning over breakfast, and for him, he goes down to his lake home in Indiana. For me, it's taking the boat out for a few hours. For others, it's playing around the golf. You just have to find whatever that is, whether it's a thing or a place that allows your blood pressure where you can detach
yeah,
because you have to manage stress, you have to manage your emotions. And look, let's face it, work is just part of our life. It's not our life, right? We have family, we have spouses, children, grandchildren, friends. Uh,
yeah,
all of that is community, church. All of that is so important. So
yeah,
that's why I always thought about business in the context. It's a game. It literally is a game. Even though
yeah.
3 of the 4 companies I ran were in financial distress when I came in, it's a game. It's meant to be fun, and we wanna win, and that's the way I always approach it. I never felt like somebody was gonna, take me out in the parking lot and shoot me if I fail. It's just not that serious.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh, so many good things. I'm going to just highlight two things here and then I'm going to ask you for one takeaway for our audience. So, two things that I think are so important as takeaways. One is what I hear you saying is you're managing stress all day long. And one thing that I find with clients and that stress is through mindset too. It's keeping
Mhm.
yourself your brain at a level where it is not the emotional part of the brain is not elevated. And oftentimes what we will find with our leaders is they do. It's like, "Oh, I go play golf." Well, what are you doing the rest of the day? If you're not managing one golf game is not going to
Right.
fix everything. And maybe a golfer would beg to differ. I'm not a golfer, but what I do know to be true is we do need to take care of ourselves throughout the day and really calibrate and recalibrate if we find ourselves going off track. And so I love hearing you say, "Hey, I've got my emotions in check." And so whatever that means for you, whether it's deep breathing, whether it's exhaling for, a longer exhale, getting up and walking around outside, calling a friend to laugh on the phone for a minute when you find yourself getting more agitated. Whatever you need, do it throughout the day. Don't wait for that one golf game at during the weekend to fix all of your fix all of your well-being issues. So I hear that. I also love the boat because it's getting out in nature, and we do know that
Yep.
nature is healing. So, whether you are a boater, whether you're a hiker, whether you're a walker, getting outside and being in nature really does have that calming effect. So, I I really appreciate both those examples. And I am going to ask you, Michael, this has been such a rich conversation. Can you leave our listeners with one takeaway? If you could say of everything, and I know you've got people saying, just tell me the three most important things. Now I'm going to say, which I know that's not possible to do. Now I'm going to say, I know you can't do three, but if they only take one takeaway besides buying the CEO playbook, what is that one takeaway that you would hope people leave with?
The one takeaway is I can't emphasize enough the importance of improving your emotional quotient, which is EQ. I
Mhm.
mean, I think we all understand that at some level to be a leader, you have to have a reasonably high level of intelligence or IQ. But in working with many, many bright people over my career, some of them who unfortunately had marginal career success, it wasn't because of low IQ, it was low EQ. And when you think about emotional quotient, what it really is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and the ability to understand, manage, and influence the emotions of other people. In fact, not long ago, I read an article in the Harvard Business Review where high EQ was actually linked to real self awareness, self control, and likability. And I think leadership, having a high EQ is so important. Reflecting back on the last 40 years, I mean, let's face it, right? IQ's already baked in; it can't change. The great news is with EQ, it can change, and it can change for the positive.
Boom. That is such an important takeaway because it means that we're all capable of it. And I never like things that leave people thinking, well, shoot, that's a bummer for me because I don't have X, Y, or Z. This is something we all can develop. So, Michael Mulhern, I have a feeling we're gonna have a lot of people wanting your book. Can you let them know where they can find it? It is not on Amazon, so stop searching there. And Michael, take it away. Let them know where to find it.
No, thanks so much. The CEO Playbook is available on my personal website, www.playbookceo.com. So look forward to sending you out a copy.
Michael, it has been such a gift to spend time with you. Thank you for joining me on What's Possible.
Thank you.